I'm about to talk to Gloria Steinem. I'm pretty excited about this, honestly. She's been a huge leader and inspiration to everyone working around issues of gender equality, including those of us who work on issues of boys and men, partly because we're trying to do that in a way that helps everyone to rise. Women and girls, boys and men rising together. And that's the spirit that I really wanted to kind of dig in and figure out how she'd managed to pull that off. Gloria, I'm really excited to have this conversation. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. Thank you so much.
Me too.
We met last year in your home, your beautiful home. So thank you for inviting us in here too. And I really wanted to circle back to this conversation with you about where we are in terms of gender equality, how we work on behalf of boys and men without in any way turning our backs on women and girls. And so I think it's particularly timely now. Honestly, I think that the debate about gender has become quite polarized, quite difficult water to navigate politically.
Well, that's interesting. Tell me how you think it has changed.
Well, I feel like what's happened is that the tone has become much more zero-sum, and actually young people are more likely to believe that something's zero-sum than in previous generations. So that could apply to...
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Stephanie Stancheva's work suggests a rise in zero-sum thinking. So in other words, like if one group rises, that must mean another group falls, right? So if you want women to do better, then it means you have to be indifferent to or even celebrate the struggles of men, because it's like one or the other, right? And then the same the other way around. And that's not the spirit of the women's movement that you're the leader of.
No, absolutely not.
Almost the opposite. Like I've always felt you're very positive some.
Yes, I mean, we each were missing some of the total human experience. Women were often confined to the home and to raising children, and men to professional activities or the military. And we were just trying to say that everybody has a choice of both. There was a whole program here in New York called Oh Boy Babies, because it was...
Try and break the gender stereotype.
Yeah, a child care center that invited once a week boys from a boys' school in, and the boys were fascinated with the babies, right?
Yeah.
So it was called Oh Boy Babies.
Yeah, well, I think you wrote, I think, that we've spent a lot of time arguing that women can do anything men can do.
And vice versa.
But we shouldn't forget to also argue that men can do what women can do.
Yes, because otherwise women just have more work.
Right, you just expand women's roles.
Right.
But it has been difficult. I mean, that's the other thing I lean back to the women's movement for, is like the movement around women in STEM, women into politics, women into business leadership. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that we've achieved all of the goals, but there has been progress, there's been institutional support. But getting men into what I call HEAL professions, which is in health and education, there isn't much support.
Oh, that's a good acronym. Right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, maybe this will help popularize it. But it's interesting because like most psychologists now are women, 20%, only 20% male. So we've seen a decline in the share of men in therapy, in social work, in K-12 education. So in K-12, it's 23% male now, down from 33% male. So we're seeing a decline in the share of men in these HEAL professions, these health and education professions, and not yet a real appetite to do anything about that. I want your advice on this, because I struggle to persuade the institutions like that representation matters that way around as well. So are there lessons from the women in STEM movement that I can apply to the argument for getting more men into those professions? Because that feels to me like I could draw on that.
What we need are human examples. So it probably would be helpful and not that expensive to send exemplary men who can expand the boys' ideas of what they can do.
It sounds like you would agree then that it is just as important to have men in education roles, in caring roles, as it is to have women in, say, engineering and law.
Yes,
that we need to be doing both.
We need to be doing both, and we need to be doing it multiracially at the same time.
The other thing that I think the women's movement did very well was to do some institution building, particularly in the 1970s. And so you did see a real flowering of different institutions in education, in nonprofits, etc. And I think as a result of that, they've continued to be able to raise awareness of certain issues. So you have institutions on their own, think tanks, pressure groups, nonprofits, many you're involved in, and then within UN Women, you have women's offices, etc. I now think there's a case for at least some institution building to draw attention to the issues of boys and men as well, as long as it's done in a way that isn't pitted against women and girls. And so I've drawn an institutional lesson too, which isn't just an intellectual issue. It's also an institutional issue. Would you agree with that? Would you advise that?
No, I agree with that. But as you were saying that, I was thinking maybe we are in a place now where we can more often ignore gender and go for interest and occupation and talent and who knows what, So if you're going to direct a movie, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. If you're going to lead a fifth grade class, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman or who is in the class. I mean, humanity, I hope, is our goal.
So you're hoping that we can start to downweight gender in these issues rather than upweight them?
Well, it depends. It depends on the state of justice and compassion and empathy that's already there. It's remedial what we're doing, right?
Right, but if you got to a point, let's take a specific example, right? This is an industry I didn't necessarily think we'd go here, but if you take something like the Coalition for Women in Higher Education. Now, as you probably know, like women significantly outnumber men in higher education now, certainly as students, and it's 50-50 at faculty. Is there a point where an institution like that might say, job done, let's stop thinking about gender? Or should we also have one, which I've created, which also looks at men? I'm trying to think that through.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm up enough on what's happening on campus to know where it should go. I went to a women's college myself.
Yeah.
And I see now that Harvard is changing. And Florence Kennedy, the great Florence Kennedy, once conducted a pee-in on the Harvard campus.
A pee-in?
Yeah, pee-in because there were no restrooms for women.
You weren't involved in that yourself, so the pee-in. How many people took part in this pee-in?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't remember. I just
right. Well, it's interesting because in a way that we're laughing about that, right? And I do think that there's something in the current debate about gender that is lacking, and it is a degree of humor, a degree of joy, a degree of almost playfulness. And like I always feel like whenever I read you, listen to you, meet you, there's this sense of positivity around it and kind of joy. It's not negatively framed. It's not deficit framed. I miss that.
You say what that makes me remember is that laughter is the only emotion you can't compel. You can make somebody afraid. You can even make them think they're in love if they're dependent for long enough. But you can't compel somebody to laugh. And as a result, in some Native American cultures, there is a god of laughter. Maybe we need that.
I love that because I think that's missing from so much of the current debate. It always feels quite negative. We don't presume the best of each other, etc. So I love that idea. So I love the pee-in. There's a great campaign in the UK which was about more father involvement. And what they did was they put those baby carriers on all the statues of men across London. So you had like Winston Churchill and Nelson and John Stuart Mill and whoever it was. And so everyone woke up one morning, they did it overnight, and suddenly like they had all these things on. And the police left them for a while because they weren't doing any harm.
Right.
It wasn't spray painting them. It wasn't damaging those statues. It was putting a baby pouch on them, a colorful baby pouch. It was funny. It was playful. It was positive.
Yes, any examples are helpful. I mean, gay male couples who have children and raise those children, that's a very helpful vision. It may be made fun of by hyper-masculine men, but it's still very important to see that men can love and raise children, can have custody of children, that all human roles should be available to all humans.
Yeah. I want to ask you about a couple of words that I think are probably quite dear to you. Feminism and patriarchy. So if we start with feminism, recent polling suggests that fewer people are likely to describe themselves as a feminist, including women, than in the past. And then it seems like that's not because they're not in favor of gender equality. If you ask them if they're in favor of gender equality in every direction, they'll say yes. But there's something about the term feminism that seems to just be not attracting people in a way that I think is radically different. I'm in my late 50s, like even to when, 20 years ago for me, let alone for you. What do you think's happened to the term feminism, and should we move beyond it? Should we reinvent it? I don't quite know what to do with that word now.
I'm not sure, because I'm not sure the source of the reaction that you're talking about. Whether people think it sounds weak because it's feminine.
No, it seems like, because there is polling on this, there's a sense that when you say, are you a feminist? People don't hear, are you in favor of full gender equality in all regards? They think that it's now a movement that's defined in more negative terms, that it's more anti-men. And so they then are much less likely to say that they're feminists because it seems deficit framed.
Mhm.
Like, that seems to be one of the driving forces behind this move away from it. And it might come back a little bit to this sense of like,
Well,
people
we could use humanist, which has its own problems because it tends to mean you don't believe in God.
Yes, that's right. It's used as a secular. It's a synonym for secular.
Right.
But it troubles me a bit, this term, because I think it used to be to be a feminist
Well,
was straightforward. But
true, but there was always the alternative of saying women's liberationist.
yes,
And that may not be as frequent now, but I always liked it because it was more active.
I agree, and it's more positive as well. In a weird way, there was a bit of a turn against that term, and women's lib became, something of a negative term in certain people's mouths. But I do think that's right. I think it was more liberating. It was more positive, and it didn't sort of frame it some way as necessarily in this slightly zero sum way. The other term that's come up quite a bit recently is the term patriarchy, and as we're in your home, you have a smash the patriarchy sign up there, Gloria, and I would expect nothing less than But there was a think tank recently advised Democrats not to use that term. So if you're a Democrat candidate, don't talk about the patriarchy politically, right, as a political decision.
Don't talk about it negatively, positively, or both.
Just don't use it because it sort of turns people off. It's very associated with a particular mindset.
Well, it is. I mean, there's also matriarchy, which does exist in a few cultures, right?
How do you define a patriarchy? When you say that word, what do you think?
Well, I'm not sure how much it encompasses, but it is father superiority or male superiority. Women who marry take their husband's name, not the other way around, or not using both hyphenated, which we also do. So I think what we want is egalitarian, is human, is compassionate, is empathetic. And the more we can downplay when it's not relevant, gender, class, race, probably the better off we are.
Better to meet people where they actually are rather than pre-apply a sort of label to it.
Yeah, it's useful, and I'm in favor of maintaining all words. I love reading, writing, everything, but I think it's overused.
It's more culturally defined, I think, now than in some ways economically defined. One of the things you're very closely associated with is this idea of liberation requiring economic power.
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, here we are in a democracy. We've never had a female president. How crazy is that? I mean, we've had very qualified women who ran for president.
Yeah, I feel like at this point, I grew up in the UK. I'm a proud US citizen now, but so I was 10 when Margaret Thatcher came to power, and she was there for the next 11 years. And so she was, for my formative years, essentially, I didn't actually realize that you could really have male prime ministers because I'd only ever known a woman. So it was very interesting.
What allowed that to happen, do you think?
Well, it was very interesting that she came from the right, of course. And so there is an argument that if you're going to break through a gender stereotype and a ceiling like that it might be more easier to do that from the Conservative side. I mean, when she became Prime Minister, only 5% of members of Parliament were women. Right? It's now more than a third. And all of the parties except the Conservative Party are majority female now. And we've had 2 female prime ministers in the UK since. So we're up to 3 now. But I think it was something extraordinary about breaking that ceiling. I think in the US case now, honestly, would you celebrate if we had a female president, or would you just be relieved that the embarrassment was over? What would your emotion be?
It would depend who it was,
Okay.
okay, right. But I think I hope I could celebrate.
Yeah, but it was slightly conditional on who it was, because that's
no, because it is about the substance, not just the form.
Yeah. One of the things that I associate with too is recognizing that whilst there are many more similarities between men and women than there are differences, and then there are huge differences within the female and the male population, that there are some differences. And that we can
But the differences really, when you come down to it, have to do mostly with procreation. I mean, even height, weight, and muscles are not reliable.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
height is in the news right now.
It's not consistent. You know, I mean, the male-female differences, I mean, they
overlap.
They're very big, strong women and small, not so strong men.
Yes.
Right.
I actually really like the example of height, because when you say men are taller than women, everybody knows what that means. They don't think, they can't, if they then say, well, I just saw a really tall woman. Mm-hmm. Yes. They know that it means there's an overlapping distribution, right? They know that it means on average.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that we don't see couples where the woman is taller than the man. We do.
Yes.
Right, and vice versa.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I was rereading one of your pieces, which is about men and women talking, an essay, I think, and where you talked about some of the different communication styles. And what you argued was that we shouldn't force women to adopt classically and stereotypically male ways of communicating in order to succeed in the world. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes, because there's a kind of boardroom way of speaking, which is not necessarily democratic and doesn't invite people to make suggestions necessarily. So why not adopt what is often culturally a female way of group? You know, everybody speaks in turn and you sit in a circle instead of in a hierarchy. I mean, you know, we can all take the good parts of gender and universalize them.
Yes. And perhaps there'll be some occasions when the more male way of communicating might be more effective, right?
Yes,
and you want to mix
if
of
you're
both.
in the fire department.
Right, or you're making fast decisions. And what I really liked about that argument, and I like it generally applied, is that it holds some difference in mind on average, without stereotyping, and without suggesting one is necessarily better than the other. It's just that they could be a little bit different.
Also, I wonder, it always seems to me that the big differences in gender are more concentrated in reproductive years than when we're very young or very old. You know, gender probably still has more of a reproductive role than a totally human role. I mean, there are the cultures that were here before Europeans showed up seem to have understood that better. For instance, in Native American cultures, or at least in the Cherokee one, older women, grandmothers, chose the chief, who was a male. I mean, he was in charge of protecting the tribe, but they were in charge of governing the tribe.
They decided who that.
And they decided who the chief would be. And they could depose the chief.
Yeah. There's this famous story about the Webbs, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, who were the founders of the Fabian movement in the UK, that then led to the Labour Party. And she was the more formidable of the two. And she was asked once, so this is in the late 19th, early 20th century. So she was asked by a journalist, well, who makes all the important decisions between, in the household? And she said, well, of course, Sydney, as the man, makes all the important decisions. And then she added, but I decide which ones are important. Which I really liked. It's kind of famous. There is actually again, it's in the spirit of difference, and you've raised this issue about Indigenous people a couple of times now. There's a Hopi Indian saying that one of the roles of fathers in the tribe is to take the kids up the mountain. And it's a long hike up the mountain, and then show them the world that they're going to have to go and explore. And that's a particularly kind of paternal role to sort of say, you're going to go out, you're going to explore, etc. And I personally like that. I personally, because I think it's quite pro-fatherhood. I think it shows there's some difference. But I can also imagine how people might say, well, that's very heteronormative and patriarchal and gendered, right? Why is it the dad's taking the kids up?
Well, but every once in a while, maybe a woman does, a mother does. I mean, and much of the imagery in Native America is female imagery. And as I was saying, the grandmothers in some tribes, at least, picked the male leader of the tribe and could depose the male leader.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So, sex is permanent, although there may be a surgical exception to that, I'm not sure, but sex is pretty permanent. And gender is cultural, familial, literary. I mean, it's creative. It's a human invention.
It's all performed in that sense. And it also can shift quite radically. I mean, I'm doing a lot of work on fatherhood now, and it's very interesting how just the role of fathers in particular, I think because of your point about reproductive roles, the roles of mothers is somewhat less changing. Of course, it's not to suggest that they haven't changed radically in the last century or so, whereas the paternal role seems to radically change. It can be very different in different environments, partly, I think, because of that cultural shift.
Do you think that male couples, homosexual couples, have helped that because two men play all the roles?
I do. I also think that same-sex couples, there are many more women, same-sex couples raising children than men. But I think that both of them, both types, have actually done a couple of things. One is to break down some gender stereotypes, but also, in some ways, I think led a debate about saying it is also useful to have different kinds of people in the lives of kids, including by sex. And so, for example, a lot of female same-sex couples, particularly if they have sons, are quite intentional about involving uncles, brothers, and other men in the kids. They're actually very often the easiest to persuade that it's not a good idea to raise children in a man-free world, right? And I don't really think anyone actually thinks that, do they? I mean, like some of the feminist utopias do.
Our uniqueness. I mean, each of us, wherever we are, there's never going to be another us.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. You probably know about intersectionality and this idea that you go through different identities overlap. So gender, race, class, geography, national origin, and that they all intersect. And Adam Gopnik, who writes The New Yorker, had a great line where he said, the node on which all of these identities ultimately intersect is called the person. Right?
Yeah.
And it's back to your point about uniqueness. But one of the reasons I liked your discussion of talking is because you made it really clear that we have to be careful not to treat women as somehow sort of defective men, and that the way to liberate women is to make them like men. To do you took aim at assertiveness training, for example, as in some ways denying some of the power of the female ways of communicating. I love that, but I want to suggest that it could also perhaps go the other way as well.
Yes, no, it definitely does. That's the kind of often revolutionary nature of two men who are a couple and raise children and so on, because they take masculinity beyond its confines.
Yeah, but also that I'm thinking about things like emotional openness, availability, even something as basic as crying.
Crying, yes, absolutely.
And I think on the one hand, you can have a world where like boys don't cry, men aren't allowed to cry, etc. But I've also noticed, recently, for now, I think there's quite a lot of crying going on among men. I think there's been a real
Yes,
opening up
I
around
hope so, because
Right.
it's a great stress reliever
It is.
to be able to cry.
Oh, it's also quite good to cry with laughter as well. That's the ultimate, I think, to
Yes.
do both. 'Cause
Right,
then,
right.
but also, it just does look as if, on the average, men do cry a little bit less than women, right? They're just a little bit inclined to do that. And that might not always be terrible, but sometimes there's this sense of like, well, the default, a world where the default is the male way of being, right? And women have to be like that if they're going to succeed. Bad. Patriarchy, arguably. But equally, a world where you say to men, well, the default way of being is female,
Mhm.
and you need to be like that, right? And if you're not like that, you're malfunctioning as well.
I remember when I was still wandering around lecturing and so on, meeting a woman who was the head of some major business, I don't know. And when she got angry, she cried. And so people thought she was sad, and she always said to them, I am not crying because I am sad. I am crying because I'm angry. So we, we just have to do our best to communicate what we're really feeling and to listen. I mean, listening is crucial to understanding.
Yeah, because I do worry a little bit. I think you're trying to get to a world where you're wanting to honor people in their fullness as individuals. And if, on the average, that means that the guys are a little bit different in our communication style, in our propensity to cry, in some of our interests, in our reproductive role than women, that's okay, as
It's
long as it's
okay.
not better.
It's okay, except I wouldn't generalize. I would say if an individual man
Yeah.
is, contesting the usual masculine, that's okay.
Mm.
And also for a woman.
Yeah, because that's the fear, isn't it? The fear is that if you introduce any acknowledgement of difference, that you end up affecting individuals. You end up hurting them by saying, well, men don't do that.
Mm.
You know, that's not a thing that men do.
Yeah, there's the generalization that is obvious when it comes to race, or at least I hope it's obvious when it comes to race, and class is also true of gender.
Yeah. There's more difference within.
Right. And I'm glad that we accidentally have English, which is not a very gendered language, unlike the Romance languages.
Mm. Yeah, that turns out to be useful, doesn't it? But I agree with you about this. Economists call it statistical discrimination, which is, you say that because group A, say women tends to be more like this than this, it does not mean that person A. And so the example I use from my own life, I mentioned that I have a son who's an elementary school teacher and a sister-in-law who's an engineer. Now, even if we think there are some differences that are going to lead on average there to be fewer men in elementary school teaching than engineering, how dare you suggest that there's anything wrong with someone breaking that gender stereotype? So I think that's what you've historically tried to do. And I'm just saying this, and tell me if I'm getting that wrong.
No, I think we strive, the social justice movements, whether it's the civil rights movement or the women's movement, or so, to say we're going to remove the restrictions that come from generalization, that come from saying men, women, masculine, feminine, people of color, whatever, and look for and honor the uniqueness and the individuality. So we may need to band together more to remove the restrictions, but what we're trying to give birth to is individuality, part of a community. I mean, we're communal animals. We don't generate what is oxytocin, I think.
Mm-hmm. The love hormone, yeah.
and unless we're together.
That's right, and it's a great example of a difference. I was really delighted to learn recently from Sarah Blaffer-Hurdy's book that mothers get the oxytocin spike from breastfeeding and from from close physical contact with their kids, but fathers, they get some oxytocin spike from that. But fathers typically they do also get that spike in that hormone, but they get it from a different activity. What do you think that is?
I suppose cuddling, holding? No, what is it?
Throwing the kid in the air and catching them. or something like that. It's more rough and tumble. It's more like, but you know the image
I
of the
don't know
father?
about that. It sounds dangerous.
Well, you have to catch them. That's the key thing. But there's some. I find that a beautiful finding because as a dad, there's actually a danger sometimes. I think that because you don't necessarily have the same biological connection and the same hormonal kind of reactions, that there's something wrong with you. I can speak to a lot of dads who just they don't feel the same way about their babies. I mean, again, it's generalizing, but they don't, in those early months, especially, as the mum does, right? They
Well,
just don't.
maybe that has to do with breastfeeding and
The
nothing
opposite.
and nothing else.
Yeah,
Because two men who are raising a baby as parents, I'm sure.
you can also change it. That's right. You can
Right.
change it. Yeah. So as you know, I've spent the last few years now working on issues of boys and men. And the reason I've done that is because I think there are some real challenges facing a lot of boys and men now, especially those from working class backgrounds, Black boys and men especially, and that they are not getting enough attention, or they're not getting enough attention from the right kind of people. In other words, policy people, solutions, positive sum people. So for example, the suicide rate among young men has risen by a third since 2010.
That's awful.
And we're losing 40,000 men a year now to suicide. Almost all the rise since 2010 is young men.
I mean, this is too big a question, but how would you describe the cause?
We don't know. It's interesting that before 2010, it was more middle-aged men. And so there did seem to be a stronger link, particularly working class men, to the economy. And so there was this term.
So because they can no longer play a masculine, quote unquote, role, support their families.
It seemed like it. It went along with alcohol use too. But there was this term deaths of despair that came. It was Anne Case and Angus Deaton that termed.
I live across the street from a very expensive boys' school. And I see these little boys in ties and blazers and coming, and I just want to go across the street and tell them, take off your ties and blazers if you want to. Do it. Yeah, right. It's still going on. And I think if this is any measure, this is a very expensive school, more in the upper classes.
Well, we don't know what the cause is of that rise, but we do also see the Equimundo survey finds that 2/3 of young men say that no one really knows them very well. Most think that no one will want to date them. And so there is this sense of loss and difficulty among boys and men. But I'm also very attentive to the fact there's still so much more to do for women and girls, and trying to hold those two things together. Because I agree with you that we want to lower the barriers to flourishing for everybody, right? But if there is a specifically gendered issue like the pay gap for women, or these suicide rates for men, or a lot of boys struggling in education, especially Black boys, we want a response to that that doesn't then.
Well, do you think that we should try to have more groups that are directed towards suicide without gender, or directed towards parenthood without gender?
I think that we should recognize when an issue is strongly gendered and formulate our messaging and our policy appropriately. So I'll give you an example. A state that we're working with went through all of their literature on suicide prevention to look at who was shown. Like on the website, they have like hoarding advertisements for their suicide hotline and so on. And in that state, 80% of the suicides are male. But they then discovered
That's awful.
that 80% of the people on the images were women. So it was the other way around. And that men were much less likely to call the suicide hotline, even though they're 4 times more likely to commit suicide. They are now changing.
And who was answering the suicide hotline?
That's a great question.
Equally men and women.
I don't know, but that's exactly isn't that exactly the right sort of question? Is that if we think, well, this does skew in quite a gendered direction, we should be aware of that and try and find ways to reduce suicide generally. But if that's highly gendered, we should work on that. In just the same way that in the labor market, if it's disproportionately mothers who are being penalized in the workplace, then we should probably respond in a gendered way, right? So I think you can have gendered policy without gender politics.
Well, and there are some things that are still way too universal. That is, when a male-female couple marries, she takes his name, although there was and still is a hyphenated movement.
Yes. Although that just kicks it one generation down the line, doesn't it? And there's been an interesting move on that. I think that's becoming a bit less. I think women are starting to take their husband's name again a bit more now, which some people are seeing as a sign of success, because they're saying that now that women have more economic power, thanks to people like you, Gloria, that actually the symbol of that doesn't matter as much as it
Well,
once
you should
did.
probably be able to choose, take a third name. Why not?
Yeah.
Right.
There's
right. For years in the New York Times, I was Miss MISS Steinem of MS Magazine.
So they had double misses.
Yeah, they just
Right.
refused.
The UN has a program which I've participated in, which is called He for She.
Mhm.
And it's, I'm sure you know about it, it's an allyship movement. And I think that's a great movement, that actually getting more men supportive of women's liberation. There are a growing number of women now, including Melinda French Gates, who's funded our work, I'm delighted to say, and others, the First Partner of California, Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, who are becoming quite outspoken on behalf of boys and men's issues as well. So there seems to be what you would almost call a she for he movement growing as well. And I wonder if you would welcome that. Would you welcome having a sort of companion movement?
And as you speak, I'm wondering, I went to a women's college.
Did you go to Wellesley?
No, Smith. But same thing.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe there shouldn't be single-sex colleges.
Why do you say that?
Because it's perpetuating this kind of division.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for me to say or dictate, because people get to choose. But at the time, it seemed to me good, because it meant that women were participating equally in classes. They weren't afraid to raise their hands or, whatever. But maybe we've passed that.
Yes. Well, certainly we see strong outperformance by girls and women in education now. It's interesting, there was a recent study that came out that suggested that girls actually do feel that they'll get quite a lot of social support if they say they're going to go into politics. So I sort of feel like you've won that battle in a way, Gloria, which is to say that we've changed the culture, but we still haven't broken some of those ceilings. And I worry a little bit that we'll go back because of the tone of politics and the culture of politics, I think. Really has changed.
But Trump is just a bad person regardless of gender. He's right.
You're not going to make it about gender, are you? Because you're about people. Yeah. So what you're going to have bad women and bad men, and it's not zero sum.
No.
So it sounds like you would be at least nominally a she for he, in the sense of you want us all to rise, like you want us to rise.
Oh
together,
yes.
right?
No, absolutely.
Something else I wanted to ask you about is a phrase that you popularized from Irina Dunn. And I wonder if you would find it as useful a phrase today as you did then, which was, I think you discovered it in Australia. And the term was, a woman needs a man, like a fish needs a bicycle.
Yes, somebody, I was traveling in Australia, and apparently somebody had written that on a ladies' room wall, and it caught on, and people had it on their shirts, and so on and so on.
It's high grade graffiti for sure, right? That is much better than most of the graffiti that I've seen.
I still think it has a purposeful humor, because it is the need is attached to social convention, to salary, to all kinds of things, which shouldn't be true, right?
The way I've always interpreted it is that it was largely an economic dependency argument, and it was in that spirit of liberation, which was to say, we always want that to be true, that women are not economically dependent on men. I think you also said marriage should always be a choice, not a necessity.
Yes, right, absolutely, right.
It's in the spirit of that, but you can now we are where we are. The way that some people can hear that now is somewhat dismissive of men. It's like, well, we don't need you anymore. Like, thanks for the
Well, I
last
hope
10,000
not,
years. We'll
because
take it from here.
it was meant as a joke. I mean,
Right.
Right.
Yes, but that's okay. That's important because it takes us back to where we were before. That's how I've always interpreted it, which is you have to treat it in the right tone, which is more lighthearted.
Mhm.
You're actually shouldn't read that as a statement about whether or not we still need men in society.
Humor is still something of a problem. I mean, there's still more, I think, many more stand-up male comics than stand-up female comics. And the age of women in public life on television and so on is probably still less than the age of men in public life. So we're still, yeah.
There's still further to go.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's part of the challenge is that if I'm advocating for more attention to some of these issues that boys and men are struggling with, you'd always always encounter the legitimate response that, well, there's still so much we still need to do for women and girls.
Yes, but it's not a choice. I mean, it's not either or. You're doing both. I mean, we're sitting here talking to each other. I mean, we're not categorizing each other, right?
No, but I think the radicalism of doing both is something that you're underestimating. I wish it were. Well, I think we're both underestimating. What I want to do is I want to underline the radicalism, the positive radicalism of what you've just said, which is doing both.
Mm-hmm.
Doing both is hard.
I mean, there is a question. I mean, things can have a role even if not for the majority. So maybe single-sex education is still necessary for some, but there should always be a choice.
Yeah, so a good example. I mean, the best looking evaluations of single-sex education seem to be for Black boys, for example, particularly those from low-income areas where they can maybe just, structure the curriculum in a way that's appropriate, get the right teachers, et cetera, and get great outcomes.
Well, and also they're in a unfortunate position of seeing fewer people in positions of authority that look like them, probably.
Correct. I think the role model.
We've only had one person in the White House, for instance.
Right.
Yeah.
The role modeling is hugely important. So this is my last question. What gives you hope right now about the possibility of making progress in this space around gender?
Well, first of all, I'm a hopeaholic. You should know that.
Well, I think your career testifies to that.
Because hope is a form of planning. If you don't hope for it, it means you don't envision it. And if you don't envision it, it becomes way less possible. So, no, hope is definitely a good thing.
And you remain hopeful for the women's movement, for gender equality?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, otherwise I would be giving up. Hello, I'm not going to do that.
Doesn't seem like you're going to do that anytime soon, for sure. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Gloria Steinem as much as I did, and I hope you'll consider supporting her work through the MUS Foundation, through Gloria's Foundation, as well as following the work of the American Institute for Boys and Men, very much in the spirit of We Rise Together.